Don't forget to like and subscribe. A few months ago, I was spending the weekend staying warm inside, enjoying the last chilly days before spring arrived. It was a cold and rainy night, so I had nothing better to do than curl up on the couch, watch some movies, and relax. Not long after dinner, though, I heard a knock at the door. I got up and walked over, but when I looked through the peephole, I didn't recognize the man outside. He was wearing a dark green jacket and a beanie, holding a snow shovel. Given that there was no snow on the ground, I had no idea what he was doing here. I cracked the door just an inch and asked what he wanted. It only took a few seconds of hearing him ramble to know something was off. He stumbled over his words, launching into a strange story about being new to the neighborhood and looking for odd jobs to do around the yard. Something about it felt unnatural, so I told him, "No thanks," and started closing the door. But just as I did, he placed his hand on it. For a second, he just stood there, staring at me, keeping the door from shutting. Then, finally, he let go, and I immediately locked it. After a moment to process what had just happened, I peeked through the window. He walked down to the sidewalk and disappeared into the fog and rain. I kept watching for a minute, making sure he was actually gone, then went back to my movie. He had definitely been acting sketchy, but I figured he would just move on to the next house. Over the next hour, the rain picked up. I had started another movie in the living room, though I was barely keeping my eyes open. But suddenly, I was jolted awake by a loud thump above me. It was just a single sound, and with the storm outside, I couldn't tell how loud it actually was. What stood out, though, was that it had come from above. I got up and walked upstairs, expecting to find something had fallen over or maybe even a leak in the ceiling. But after checking every room, I found nothing. I figured it could have been a loose gutter shifting in the wind or something minor, so I brushed it off and went back downstairs. Feeling more awake now, I decided to finish my movie before heading to bed. By the time I was finally ready to sleep, it was almost midnight. I shut off the TV and started turning off the lights around the house. As I made my way upstairs, though, I noticed something strange. The air suddenly felt colder. Maybe I was too tired to think much of it, but as I started closing the doors to each room, something caught my eye. One of the bedroom windows was slightly open. I stared at it, frozen in place, trying to understand how that was even possible. I was sure I hadn't opened it, and with how cold it was outside, I would have noticed earlier. I stepped closer and saw something that made my stomach drop. On the windowsill, barely visible, was the faint imprint of a shoe. A rush of panic hit me as I slowly turned around, my ears straining for any sound. The low creaking of the house mixed with the rain on the roof. But now, knowing that someone had climbed through that window, it all felt different. Someone was inside my house. I forced myself to move as quietly as possible, creeping back down the hallway. The doors to the other rooms were all open, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be watching me from the darkness of one of them. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I made it downstairs without making a sound. Grabbing my phone, I slipped into the garage and dialed 911. The 5 minutes it took for an officer to arrive felt like an eternity. The only thing I could hear was the rain. No footsteps, no creaks, just silence. When the officer finally knocked, I let him in and stepped onto the porch, waiting as he searched the house. Not 2 minutes later, he called out from upstairs. And then, he came down holding someone in handcuffs. It was the same man from earlier, the one with the beanie and the shovel. As he passed me, his face twisted into an expression of pure anger. The officer told me that he had been hiding in the master bedroom, the same room I had been seconds away from walking into. Thinking back, I realized the thump I heard hours ago was likely him climbing onto the roof. He had slipped in through the second-story window, one I had never thought to lock. And what's even more chilling, the officer pointed out that the guy had taken off his shoes after climbing inside, probably to avoid leaving tracks on the carpet. The only reason I even noticed something was wrong was the tiny imprint he left on the windowsill. Had I gone to bed without noticing it, I don't know what would have happened. But given that he went straight for my bedroom and was waiting there in the dark, I know his intentions weren't good. The judge agreed. Even though it's been a few months, I still have nights where I lie awake, unable to shake the feeling that someone might be hiding inside my house. A couple of years ago, I took a temporary job at a 24-hour convenience store in a small town in Texas. I was planning to move in about 6 months, so I couldn't commit to anything long-term, but I still needed to make some extra cash before leaving. The job paid well enough, and since they had an opening for the overnight shift, I took it. My main duties were running the register and handling small maintenance tasks throughout the night. By my 4th month there, I had become familiar with a regular customer. He came in almost every night, usually around 12:30 or 1 a.m. His name, or at least the name he gave, was Tom. He was an older guy, probably in his early 40s, and he drove an old blue Ford sedan. Every night, he'd buy random items, sometimes food, sometimes household supplies, and sometimes things like rope or duct tape. It always struck me as odd that he would come in so often for things he could get cheaper at a regular grocery store. He never talked much, just gave short responses and went about his business. One night, at around 12:45 a.m., Tom pulled into the parking lot as usual. The store was empty except for me, just passing time at the counter. But something about him was different this time. He was sweating profusely and moving quickly through the aisles, searching for something specific. When he finally grabbed what he was looking for, he rushed to the counter and dropped it in front of me. A heavy-duty padlock, the kind used for securing storage units. I had a weird feeling about the whole thing, but I kept it casual. "Hey, Tom. You getting a new storage unit or something?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. He didn't look at me or respond. He just yanked some cash out of his wallet, threw it on the counter, and waited for me to ring him up. I handed him his change, and without a word, he grabbed the bag and hurried out the door. His car sped off into the night. It was strange, but I tried to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe he really did get a storage unit and needed to lock it up right away. Or maybe I was overthinking it. But then, he disappeared. For almost a week, Tom didn't show up. Given how frequently he had been coming in, it was noticeable. Then, on a Tuesday night, during a slow, rainy shift, he finally returned. I was leaning back in my chair, watching the rain trickle down the window, when his blue Ford pulled into the lot. The moment he stepped out of the car, I knew something was wrong. He was moving fast, muttering under his breath as he entered the store. I greeted him, but he ignored me. He went straight to the back aisle, pacing like he was searching for something while mumbling to himself. My gut told me something was off. Then, I heard a loud thud. I instinctively looked toward the sound. It came from his car. It was a hard, deliberate hit, like someone kicking the inside of a door. My stomach dropped. I turned back toward Tom. He had stopped moving. He was just standing there in the aisle, staring at me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, another thud from the car. I could feel my pulse pounding as Tom quickly looked away and rushed out of the store. I barely had time to react before he was already in his car, speeding off into the night. Still shaken, I managed to pull out my phone and snap a picture of his license plate before he disappeared. Something told me I needed to call the police, so I did. That night felt like it lasted forever. I waited anxiously for any updates, And finally, around 5:30 a.m., I got a call. The police had tracked down the car using the plate number I gave them. What they found was worse than anything I could have imagined. Tom, who wasn't actually named Tom, had been keeping a woman locked up in a small shed behind his house on the outskirts of town. He had moved there less than a week ago, and since he had no prior registered address, there was no record of him anywhere nearby. Thankfully, the woman was rescued before she was seriously harmed. As for Tom, whoever he really was, he was arrested on the spot. He won't be walking into any stores again anytime soon. I was 14 when this happened, and this was over spring break, my parents' anniversary. Happened to be during this week, so they went on a date night a few hours north, and we're staying in a hotel having the house to myself for once. I invited one of my friends, Justin, to stay the night. He brought a ton of snacks and sodas, which we set up on the table in the basement and fired up the PlayStation. We had the speakers up pretty loud and we gaming down there for 3 hours straight. Eventually though, Justin went upstairs to get a glass of water, and when he came back down he looked worried. I asked what was up, and he said there was someone outside the house by the kitchen. We had a large sliding glass door, and I guess he saw a person standing in our backyard. I thought he was trying to play a joke on me, but he was serious. We both went back upstairs and into the kitchen, and that first look, it didn't look like anyone was in the backyard, but then we noticed that there were some smudges on the outside of the door that looked like someone might have been leaning on the glass and looking inside. That's obviously really creepy, so I shut the blinds and we did a quick perimeter check around the other windows. We didn't see anything else, so we figured we were all good again. We were both just kids and didn't really know how to handle something like this. After a couple minutes we went back downstairs and continued where we left off. Another couple hours went by and it had to be well into the night, like 2 or 3 o'clock a.m. Justin was getting tired, so we wrapped up our last match and turned off the PlayStation. The basement had 2 small couches, so we each took one and laid out some blankets, then turned off the lights and called it a night. For some reason I had trouble falling asleep. Like I would fall asleep for a few minutes and then wake right back up over and over. I don't know why. Possibly from too much caffeine, but it went on for a really long time. It felt like over an hour, but then one of these times that I woke up, something was different. I opened my eyes. It was pitch black in the whole basement, but there was a tiny streak of light across the other end of the room. I sat up a bit and could tell it was coming from the door above the staircase. I looked over at the other couch and Justin was still there, sound asleep. Did he get up at some point to get more water? There's no way I wouldn't have noticed. I got up feeling too uneasy to sleep without making sure this was nothing. I went over to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The door was cracked open, but not enough to see through. I went to the top and opened it further. The hallway light was on, and so was the kitchen light. It was about then that I remembered about that man that Justin said was standing outside the house, and I walked over to the kitchen to look out the back door. The backyard was empty and nobody was out there from what I could see. As I was about to look away though, something moved across the reflection on the glass door. I spun around, looking behind me and staring Down the hall, whatever I just saw had quickly moved across the other end of the hallway. I didn't know what to do. I just stood for a second before sprinting back into the basement. I woke up Justin, and after a quick explanation, he was just as terrified as I was. We hid in one of the closets down there and called the police. And while we were waiting, we could hear someone moving around upstairs. It was like they were running around the house looking for something. It got quiet after a few minutes though, and when police showed up, the person was gone. They found that the small bolt that locked the back door was snapped off, so that's how they got in. Other than that, we don't know anything. For several years after this incident, though, every few months we would find those same smudges on the back door of someone clearly looking inside. It wasn't until we finally got a security camera that they left us alone. At least as far as we can tell, it's been over a year since we've seen any signs of them. What they wanted is still unknown for